So after the fact, I decided that I'd tell a story a little more personally, so I changed the slide title to How the Blockchain Came to Be. I think many of you know, but in case you don't, that the work that Stuart Haber and I did is the most referenced part of the Bitcoin white paper, and that's because Satoshi, of course, built the foundation on top of our original blockchain. And I'll be talking just a little more about that in a minute. What many people are less familiar with, though, is in fact that the world's earliest blockchain began running in the early 90s and has been running continuously with the Genesis block published in the New York Times, and there it is. And anyone that needs to check the integrity of any digital record placed into the blockchain since the 90s until today only needs to go to this Sunday's edition of the New York Times, where the key hash value is registered in such a way that it is impossible to alter or tamper with anything in that continuous 30-year record without being found out. And that story is what I wanted to cover today. So I only have two things to do, and we might get finished early. The first is I just want to tell the story. And the second is Stuart and I, who will be joining me on stage in a little bit, have an NFT-related announcement that we think you'll find interesting. So what's going on? This is a younger, thinner, handsomer version of myself and Dr. Haber back in 1991. I had been working at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center in California while I was jointly working on my PhD in physics at Stanford, and I'd become obsessed with a problem. Namely, I realized that all of the world's records were going to be moving into digital form, and yet a digital record is so easy to manipulate and alter after the fact. And it really bothered me because the foundation of society is built on records, and we were going to soon move into an age when any record could be altered after the fact without anyone necessarily knowing. And so the question was how to make an immutable record. So I came back east to work at Bellcore, part of the old Bell Labs tradition. And they had this wonderful management policy called benign neglect, which means work on anything that you think is important. And it was with that latitude that I went to Stuart and said, someday this is going to be a really big problem. And as an advisor I'd had at Stanford used to say, you have to work on the big problems early before all the smart people get there so that you can make your own contribution. My advisor did, in fact, win a Nobel Prize, so that was his strategy, but I think he was fairly smart to begin with. And so I said to Stuart, let's solve this problem before everyone else realizes why it's going to be so important. And so we work along on this issue, trying to create immutable bits. And we made some good progress, but we got to a certain point where we had a workable solution, but it still required you to trust someone. And I said, if we could just remove the trust from the system, then we'd have something worth talking about. And so Stuart and I, Stuart agreed to work along with this and said, okay, let's go for it. And we tried it for a few weeks, but it proved very, very difficult. And finally, Stuart pulled me aside and said, I think this problem can't be solved. So just so we can at least get a publication out, why don't we write a proof for why you can't remove trust from a system? So we're working along on this proof, and we moving along, and I'm sorry. And one day after work, that we'd been working on it, my wife and I went with our two small children to a restaurant we could afford. This is a Friendly's. For those of you that are in this region, you'll know that Friendly's is very middle class. And we're waiting in line for a table. And instead of doing what normal people do, namely talk to each other, I sat there reflecting on the proof. And I was reviewing the proof in my mind. It went sort of like this. Okay? If two people are colluding, then the only way to check them is to have a third person looking over their shoulder, making sure that no one's doing anything wrong. But if that third person gets drawn into the collusion, then you need a fourth person looking over that person's shoulder. And the idea of the proof was this goes on forever and ever, turtles all the way down, and so obviously you can't solve this problem. So I'm working through this and getting to the conclusion that the only way this could work was if the whole world was in on the collusion. And it was at that point that I realized that that wasn't the problem, that was the solution. Namely, by creating linked records, which later, in a later paper, became blocks, in a chain, and then widely distributing those to what we would now call nodes, you can effectively make the trusted party everyone in the world. And that was a magical moment for me, because I realized that this was going to matter someday. And I'll tell you a story, and that is, trained as a physicist, I had grown up with this very famous anecdote about a very famous physicist named Hans Bethe. And one day, he finally figured out what the thermonuclear reaction was that powered the sun and all the stars. And that night, he goes out on a date with his fiancée, and she's looking up at the sky, and she goes, "Hans, look at the stars, how beautiful they are and how they sparkle." And he goes, "Yes, and I'm the only one on the planet that knows how they do it." And for that one night, I felt like I'm the only one on the planet that knows how to decentralize trust. And it didn't last long, but it was a great moment. And it's a moment that I hope you can feel like you're part of, because you're part of that tradition. And the reason that I say that, talking about the broader and longer term implications of all this, is that we recognized even then, this is a kind of skewed excerpt from the original paper, that it wasn't just a digital problem that had been solved, but that we had solved, in a sense, an age-old problem about decentralized power, authority, and how we can create systems, social systems, that allow us to guard the guards themselves. And it's really in that sense that I think this is the moment, to me, that marked a kind of turning point in time, because it was the foundation for why we no longer had to trust a central authority, allowing even one person with the record to stand up for the truth, and to give us as a community a power that had never been possible before. So with that, I'd like to just bring Stuart up on stage. Stuart rarely appears in public, and even, I'm exaggerating, and even less rarely do the two of us appear together, but we have an announcement we'd like to make. And here, let's get on the, yeah. How do we compare? Does that work? Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Stuart. Pleased to be here.
And Stuart, in fact, has a copy of the most recent New York Times that contains the link.
This is yesterday's, not Sunday's. What day is today? Yeah, okay, yeah. This is Sunday's paper as delivered to my apartment, in fact, only a couple miles south of here on the island. And appearing inside, by the way, I'm old enough so I learned to read the paper with what's called the subway fold, which I just did. You don't have that much room on the subway. The word mansplaining didn't appear for some time after I learned to read the New York Times. Here at the top, at the bottom of the paper, is a small classified ad with a hash value, a digital fingerprint, every bit of which depends on every bit registered with Surety, our system, since it was first running as experimental code at Belcor in October 1991. Here, yeah, I'll pass this around.
At any rate, I just wanted to say a word or two about NFTs in the NFT community, because for us, this work that wasn't called a blockchain at the time, but that was a chain of connected blocks that were widely witnessed, the NFT use case is not just a side effort. For us, the notion of registering assets on blockchains was really fundamental to our vision of where this record should go. And I guess I would state that, in my mind, NFTs are not a passing fad, but in fact, the harbinger of the movement to register all assets on the blockchain. So with that, I guess I'm going to say that things have worked out taken a little longer than we thought they would, but they've worked out kind of the way we thought they'd go. And in fact, we got in early so that the smart people, including some of you here in the audience, could take things farther on that foundation. And I hope you'll feel that this early heritage is not just our story, but part of your story too. Anyway, Stuart has an announcement to make, and then I'm going to push the button. You can either just let me push the button, and it will announce itself.
So, okay, I will let the thing at the other end of Scott's button launch itself.
Why is that not?
We want volume too, don't we? There we go. This was 1991. The World Wide Web did not exist. The world was clearly going digital.
I really wanted to nail down truth in the digital world.
A revolution began here, a new type of money, a new type of payment system.
But digital currency did need our solution.
The NFT phenomenon is really just the tip of the iceberg. So, if you have any questions, you have to ask Sotheby's. That's all we're allowed to say.